Valley Church. Hope for those who have given up on church.
Did you know if you wanted muscles like me, you would have to work out every day? Did you also know if you wanted strong spiritual muscles, you would have to read your Bible every day? Now you do. The more you know.
Good evening and welcome to the Freedom Valley Church Show. Thank you for watching. This program was brought to you by people like you who watch and participate and help, and by the Freedom Valley Church who believes in the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ. We are into a series of teaching here we're calling Stronger, and it is about producing people of strong faith here in central Pennsylvania, about helping you have the information, the lifestyle habits, the understanding you need to be the kind of people that can move mountains by your faith. Jesus said, if you believe even a little, you can say to a mountain, go and cast yourself into the sea, and it'll do it because you are in charge. I want to show you how to become that kind of person in this series, and I'm so glad that you're watching. Welcome back, folks. It's good to be with you again today. We're talking about how to become stronger in your faith. This whole series is called Stronger, and it's about creating men and women of strength in their faith who overcome and power through obstacles. Whether God removes the obstacle or He calls you to go through it, that you have the strength to overcome in difficult times. Today I want to talk to you about building a strong heart. The Bible has a lot to say about heart, and I have over the last few weeks talked to you about the Jeremiah scripture, for example, where Jeremiah says the heart is deceitful above all things. And I warned you that our culture talks about following your heart, where the Word of God teaches us rather that our hearts are deceitful and tend to lead us down paths from which we have to recover. So the Bible also talks about wealth being deceitful. I think that's interesting. Solomon, who was a wealthy man and who Jesus called one of the wisest men ever, talked about the deceitfulness of wealth. And so I have a piece of humor here. Sometimes when it's hard for us to see our own heart or our own distraction, it's pretty easy to see in other people. Like, for example, there's this guy that got into an accident with his brand new Beamer. He was so proud of his new BMW car, and he opened the door one day and somebody went flying by and too close on a crowded street and ripped the door off. And he called the cops, and he was so frustrated. He was there just screaming about his brand new BMW having the door ripped off. And he said to the cop, look how awful this is. Look what they did to my Beamer. And the cop said, you rich snobs are all alike. You're so consumed with what they did to your car, you don't even notice they ripped off your arm. The guy looks down at his arm and says, my Rolex! He had gotten so off on his things that his things had started to own him. So if as Jesus taught us, our heart, and sometimes our wealth is the most deceitful of all things, then we need to be aware of how to measure whether or not we're out of order and how to keep our hearts in order. Because if you lead your heart, you're leading yourself. And I believe that may seem like an oxymoron to some of us who say, but how can I lead myself? You lead yourself by leading your heart. Jesus taught it like this, and I love this scripture in Matthew 6:21. He said, wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. So what he's unlocking for us here is an understanding of how to get your heart working in the right direction. If your heart doesn't want to forgive, if your heart doesn't want to do the right thing, if your heart craves something ungodly for it, there is a way to lead your heart out of it. And some of us don't know why our heart never feels connected and never feels like we have friends around us and never trusts our world and never quite gets settled. Some of us don't even recognize that we're there. We don't know that because we don't know what leads our heart. So Jesus talked about this so that we would know. And last week I talked to you specifically about how He taught us to pray. He taught us to pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. In other words, this is going to be about your kingdom, your way all the time. And the way to settle that sometimes is what happens to our hearts. In Deuteronomy 14, Moses was trying to teach a former slave people. 400 years of slavery had warped certain parts of their thinking. And coming out of that, he was teaching them how to think like owners, to think like overcomers, to think like men and women who were called to rule and reign over the earth. And he said, understand how this works. In Deuteronomy 14, he's teaching them how to lead their hearts. And in verse 22 to 29, he says it like this. You must set aside a tithe of your crops, 1/10 of all the crops you harvest each year. Bring this tithe to the designated place of worship, the place the Lord your God chooses for his name to be honored, and eat it there in his presence. This applies to your tithes of grain, new wine, olive oil, and the firstborn male of your flocks and herds. Listen to this. Doing this will teach you always to fear the Lord your God. See, this teaches your heart. It leads your heart. Verse 24. Now when the Lord your God blesses you with a good harvest, the place of worship he chooses for his name to be honored might be too far for you to bring the tithe. If so, you may sell the tithe portion of your crops and herds, put the money in a pouch, and go to the place where the Lord your God has chosen. When you arrive, you may use the money to buy any kind of food you want, cattle, sheep, goats, wine, or other alcoholic drink. Then feast there in the presence of the Lord your God and celebrate with your household. And do not neglect the Levites of your town, for they will receive no allotment of land among you. At the end of every third year, bring the entire tithe of that year's harvest and store it in the nearest town. Give it to the Levites, who will receive no allotment of land among you, as well as to the foreigners living among you, the orphans and widows in your towns, so they can eat and be satisfied. And then the Lord your God will bless you in all your work. Now I want to talk about what Moses was teaching here and the extrapolations that he made through this for the culture of their day, explaining certain items of how to work this when it's not as straightforward as simple as the first cultural pronouncement. How to make this fit in your lifestyle. So first of all, he teaches in verse 22, you must set aside a tithe of your crops, 1/10 of all the crops you harvest every year. He's saying this, the first 10% changes the other 90%. So I often have people, I've had somebody say to me recently, would you pray with me that I would have the ability to tithe? Can I tell you, this is not time to pray. This is time to obey. Because what he's talking about here is when you set aside 10%, you set aside that 10% early or first. In fact, the Bible talks about giving God the first part or the best of your flocks, herds, grain, new wine, olive oil, and so on, as he lists them here. The best of or the first of. Let me tell you, one of the keys to leading your heart is doing this first. I remember years of really struggling with this. It hasn't been recently because we set this a long time ago. But we struggled with this many, many times in the early part of our lives before we understood the power of the first 10%. And here's what changed. When somebody showed us that how the first fruit matters and the best of matters, we changed how we go about this whole process. And here's how it works now at our house, or something like this. When we get a paycheck in, which we have direct deposit, I know many of you do that as well. We get a paycheck in, the first check that we write out or the first giving that we do, however you do it, we do it electronically sometimes, or we give by text or card or however, is our payment to God at that 10%, because that teaches us, that changes the other 90%. That teaches us that all of it belongs to God, and he's asking for us and calling on us to give this amount, to pay this amount of tithes. So it's not something, you don't pray that you have enough money to tithe. You give it first, the first 10%. Listen, you always have plenty then. If you wait until you've paid all your other bills to see if there's enough money to tithe, there never will be. But if you pay the first 10%, you will have enough money to tithe. Listen, over the years, I've accumulated some incredible stories about tithing. I sat with a family once. This is probably, it was near the beginning of this church life right here, probably 18 or 19, maybe 20 years ago. I sat with a family once who said, we are in serious financial trouble. We've just entered into a contract with the consumer credit people who take over our bills and take over our finances to help us. And so our problem is we're in big financial trouble, and we sign an agreement with them where they will go talk to our creditors, and they'll create a system to begin to pay down our notes. We have entered into contract under penalty of prosecution if we don't follow the contract, where every dollar is spoken for. And so we're looking forward to this, but now you're teaching us that the Word of God says bring the first 10% to God? How do we do that now? You know, I didn't take this answer lightly. We prayed about it carefully. I had people say, you cannot take money out of this young families, out of the mouths of their children. Be careful here, Pastor, because God values having the children fed over getting his 10%. It was a tough one for me, and I struggled with it. But I finally found where Elijah was sent to a widow's house who was gathering sticks to make her last meal. Remember that story? If you've read the Bible or you know the Word of God, you remember the story. It was a tough time in Israel's history. The economy was down. And the economy was down because they had forsaken the Lord and had started doing selfish, ungodly things. Forsaking God actually manifests in every man for himself in a selfish approach that causes the economy to shrink from the inside out. And the economy had done that. It shrunk. There was a famine in the land. It was tough. And God said, Elijah, I want you to go over across the way to another nation. I want to show you something. I have prepared a widow to take care of you. And Elijah had to say, a widow, God? Seriously? Send me to a wealthy family. Show me something where there's people with something to give. A widow? God says, just follow me. And so Elijah goes and he finds this widow gathering sticks. And he says, hey, lady, how about making me something to eat? And she says, listen, I got one meal left. My son and I are going to eat it, and then we're going to die. That's the way it is. Life is hard. Your economy has affected our economy. The famine is affecting everybody. Life is hard. And we're done. We have no other options. Elijah says back to her, hey, listen, lady, make me something to eat first. Then you and your son have food. And I promise you that if you do that, you'll never go hungry again. The lady looks at him like, you're nuts. Take the food out of the mouth of my child? Are you crazy? That's just... And I'm thinking the pressure that would put on me as a man of God, as a pastor, if I came to your home and you said you had one more meal, there's no safety net after this, we're going to eat this and die. For me to say, pay your tithe first, then eat your food. You got to know something. Here's what you know. That 10%, that first 10% changes the other 90%. And if you give to God your last meal, you'll never go hungry again. His point is very, very simple. Moses' point, he said, let me tell you, children of Israel, you will always struggle with priorities in life until you get the financial priority first, where 10% goes back to the one that gave you the ability to get wealth in the first place and to have a life. And the rest falls into place and the rest makes sense. I promise you. So I told this family, I got back to this family and I said, I know you signed this agreement with Consumer Credit to spend your money in a certain way, but let me tell you, here's what we'll do. We'll take your tithe money. You tithe on your money. We'll take your tithe money. We'll put it aside in an account. And if it comes to the place where you can't pay your bills, 3 months, 6 months, a year and a half from now, as you get through this contract, we will pay it all back. I think we offered ×4. We will multiply back to you what you have given. What do you think? I said, how could we go wrong? That'll keep us out of jail. How could we go wrong? Listen, I never paid him a dime back. You know why? Because when they started honoring God with their tithe, all the rest of the 90% started fitting together. And suddenly they said, not only are we satisfying consumer credit, we're paying ahead on our debts. We have money we didn't even know about. By the way, the husband was a chain smoker. He was smoking 15 or 20 or 25 bucks a day. Broke off of him. He found the courage, the temerity, the guts to quit. And instantly they had more money. The wife suddenly found another part-time job that came easy and was a joy to do. The kids started making money. Little kids doing their little lemonade stands. And suddenly this family who thought they were going to go to jail for tithing had more than enough. Listen, I have watched this over 30 years of ministry. I've watched this again and again and again. Those of you who don't tithe never have enough. You're never making it. You're always looking for another way to get another handout. Those of you who do are not only providing for yourself, but others also. You're giving in addition. You constantly have more than enough. And you can say, preacher, this is very, very self-serving for you to teach tithing. Or you can get the principle deeply, which is that the first 10% of your finances given back to God changes the other 90% and multiplies it. I no longer apologize for teaching that. Get mad at me all you want. You don't have to do this. But watch this principle. I loved the book a few years ago by Arthur Brooks, where he talked about how he said, I'm not even a Christian. I don't even believe in the Judeo-Christian ethic. But let me tell you this. America is only blessed in the years that it's generous, and we can prove it by the gross domestic product in America, the GDP. He said, and when America's been extraordinarily generous as a nation, we're always in a rich economy. When we're extraordinarily poor, it's because we have become a selfish people inside out, and we start holding back, and we start turning down the hatches. And listen, whether it's personal, whether it's national, the closed fist, Proverbs puts it like this: there's a person with a closed fist that never can seem to grasp enough to get by. And then there's a person with an open hand who always has more than enough. Which of those do you want to be? You start with this 10% to God, and he says, take it to the place, to bring this tithe to the designated place of worship, the place the Lord your God chooses for his name to be honored. Listen, I can't teach all the cultural significance of this, nor do I totally get it, because I didn't live 4,000 years ago. But the principle has remained the same over the centuries. That is that place where you have chosen as a family, where you've chosen as a local culture to bless the name of the Lord together, to honor God together, that's the place that ought to get your tithe. If you're giving in addition to that, none of that is tithe, that's offering. And we ought to be generous people. Generous people are generously blessed. So we like to give my wife and I love to give to the Red Cross and the local fire company and to the Fight Cancer Fund and to the Children's Orphans in Africa and to missions. And we love to give in lots of places, but our tithe belongs to the local place where God has chosen to put his name. You know why? We want the principles of God, the kingdom of God, to be the first priority in our hearts. We want to lead our hearts toward God. Listen, if your first 10% goes to your local bar, that's where your heart's going. If your first 10% goes to your local drug dealer, that's where your heart's going. And I watch some of us are incredibly poor, but we still own that cell phone and we still have the addiction, cigarettes, alcohol, whatever. We still have the money for the things we find important. You know why? It gets our heart. And it's funny how you can always find the money for the things you're addicted to. What this does is it creates a new addiction. The addiction is to God and to his kingdom. The God who promises that if you do this, I'll make the other 90% reach for you and I'll make it better. So it doesn't matter if you get... I had a man come to me recently and he said, the place I live offers me $3 a week to do chores. What would you do with that, with your talk about tithing? Preacher, I don't have the money to tithe. Listen, it doesn't matter if you make $3 or $3,000. A tithe is a tithe. For $3, a tithe is 30 cents. Bring it to the Lord. Just honor him with it and watch what he will do. He said, okay, I'll do it. I will do it. And every week he would bring me a quarter and a nickel and he'd say, Pastor, this is embarrassing. I don't feel like I don't feel like this is even worth bringing to church. I said, listen, you're not paying the church's bills. You're not responsible for the church. You're only responsible for obedience to the Lord. And if you will do this, I barely got it out of my mouth. 2 weeks later, he was offered a job. He took a job for making 10 times, 20 times, 30 times that. He started tithing on that. And quickly he got a new job. God started multiplying his life back again. He just laughs at me now and he says, I'm living the life I always wanted because I started with 30 cents. Seemed too small to even be worth it, but I did it. And I watched God multiply my life again and again and again. So bring it to the place the Lord your God has chosen. A tithe, as we understand this, and from Malachi chapter 3, it belongs in the local house of God, your place of worship, your family's house of worship. And you can easily see that in this passage, the place the Lord your God has chosen for you, the place where you have committed yourself. So a tithe belongs in your local church. That's where you ought to give your first 10%, I believe. That's where the honor of God is. And a tithe is not an accumulation of all your giving. A tithe is what you give to your local church. This is the first part that actually Malachi says you pay to your local church. Then watch this. In verse 23b, he says, doing this will teach you to always fear the Lord your God. Here's what is happening here. When I do that 10%, it changes how I look at all of life. Like if my first 10% goes to the bar, that also affects how I look at life. If my first 10% goes to cigarettes or my cell phone, that also affects how I look at life. That changes my value structure from the outset and from the onset. But when I give my 10% to God, it teaches me to always fear the Lord your God. That is, my first value and my first respect goes to God. And everything else follows. So I have people who say, it's so hard to break an addiction. It's not nearly as hard when you're leading your heart. It's not nearly as hard when you have a higher structure value there. It's not nearly as hard when you've said, God, you're first and everything else is second. That makes the heart leadership worthwhile. And so then with every time you're teaching your heart, I have people who say, man, sometimes it's hard to pay my 10%. I'm right there with you. I automated it in our lives because it was so hard for me sometimes to give up that money. And there were times when I was really tempted with, wow, what else could I have done with all that money? But let me tell you, my highest fear is a fear of God that makes me realize that my heart is deceitful, and I can really rip myself off. I've done this in various ways in times of my life where I've ripped myself off, taught myself to believe something that isn't true, and held to it fiercely until the bitter end. This teaches your heart to follow after God more than anything else. It leads your heart toward the highest value possible. It causes you to tend to always pick high values instead of picking the lowest common denominator of your feelings. Feelings are deceptive, and a heart is deceptive because it operates in feelings. But when you operate in your will, it is because you said, I'm leading my heart to feel the right things. I'm leading my heart to attach itself to God. And I want to encourage you to lead your heart toward God with your tithe toward your church. Watch God make the rest of the 90% change for you.
I took a lot of time when I was in my 20s, when I was married to my first husband, really trying to find God and trying to find out what it meant to follow his ways. And I really didn't get a whole lot of support from that. I then experienced a painful divorce, and after that divorce, I spent a lot of time drinking and a lot of time trying to numb the pain. I would spend my weekends by myself doing anything I could to numb the pain, mostly with alcohol. And it was the loneliest time of my life. I remember my grandfather making the comment to me about your eyes being the windows to your soul. I woke up one day and decided to look myself in the mirror, and I looked and saw a very broken person. And I remember that day just falling to my knees and saying, God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for the mistakes that I've made, and I'm so sorry for not following your ways all of these years, and please just help me find you. I knew that it was time to just get things right. There was no more room for drinking and trying to numb the pain anymore. I needed to find joy and I needed to find happiness. And I knew that day, I knew that I was only going to find that in a relationship with Jesus. I was working at Ruby Tuesdays in Gettysburg, and I knew during that time that I needed, that I was just craving a relationship with Jesus. I ran into Candace, and Candace actually trained me for my job at Ruby Tuesdays. It was actually right around the time her and Aaron were about to be married, and I think I asked, what church are you going to be married at? And we got onto the conversation about Freedom Valley. When she told me about some of the programs and some of the people, I just thought, this is a place I really need to check out. I sat in the back row, and when worship started, Charity was leading, and I cried like a baby the entire time. While I was weeping, someone turned around from the front row and walked back to me, and it was Cindy Jancic. And she came back and hugged me and said, "You're safe now, and we love you here." And it was during that time that I realized I was finally somewhere where I was going to feel love, because I spent my entire life not feeling love from most of the people that I was around. I was dating my now husband, Jack. We had decided that we were never going to remarry. We had been hurt too much, and we didn't want to go down that road again. I had felt like it was time. I wanted to reconnect with God. I wanted to find a place where I felt at home and where I felt loved, and I found that here. And I remember going back to Jack and saying, "You have to go. You really need to go. You need to experience this." And he came on his birthday, and he fell to his knees that first day that he was here and accepted Jesus into his life that day. 2 weeks later, we were engaged, even though we said that we were never going to remarry. We knew that we had someone else in our relationship now, and that was God. And we knew that with that, all of that pain and all of that hurt we had had in the past 20 years was now gone, because we knew we found someone else to help us through all of that. I have my days that things hurt and things get to me, but I know that he's always got my back. Faith was something that was just a mythical thing. It wasn't something that you just were born with. You had to gain it, and it was magical, and it wasn't real. But I gained faith. As soon as I accepted Jesus into my life, I gained faith.
So throughout this series, I love to hear from you. I've heard from a few of you recently by email. My email address is g@freedomvalley.org. If you want to send something directly to the church, send it to Freedom Valley Church, 3185 York Road, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, 17325. And I always love hearing from you, however you choose to do it. The series Stronger is about you walking in faith stronger than you ever have. I hope this is helpful to you and that you're growing deeper in your faith, somebody who moves mountains with the power of God. Thank you for being part of it today.